This is Patrick Floyd, March 2011, McDaniel College with Mr. Mitch Alexander.
Hey, Pat.
Hello. All right, we're here today doing the oral history interview. Let's start off with, when were you born, Mitchell, and where?
I was born in Baltimore City on October, in the month of October, 1957.
1957, a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Now, you first were introduced to Carroll County as an undergrad here at McDaniel College, correct?
That's true.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? What it was like being an undergrad here, back in the good old days of Carroll County?
Well, sure. I started my undergrad in August of 1976, and it was kind of a culture shock for me. I'd grown up in the northwest part of Baltimore City and went to school on the east side, so most of my interactions with anybody was mostly African American folks. So coming here definitely was a big transition where I actually felt like a minority. And the other times I knew I existed as one, but I did not feel quite as much as one. So definitely that was part of the contribution to the culture shock.
What kind of experiences did you have as an undergrad that really punctuated the fact that you were, one of the few here opposed to being one of the many?
Sure. I think the first time I got here on campus, it took a couple of days to run into another black student. I know we had orientation, and with the different groups, you're already clustered certain ways. So you would see snippets of people walk by in groups, but you never got a chance to interact. So that was one of my things. I guess the first meal, since we all ate as a cluster or orientation group, I didn't really get to eat with other students of color until later on, until after orientation. And I noticed then that there were certain pockets of people, pair, trios, and some other groups together. And then a few of the current members of the Black Student Union approached me about joining the club, and then it filled a need to eating with them in the dining hall. So that was some of it. Then going to classes was also another education, because looking around, there was probably many of the classes at the time I was a chemistry major, but there weren't many black students in the grouping at all. So a lot of that in and out, kind of being a minority that way.
All right. Now, after you finished here as an undergrad, you ended up coming back here to work professionally, correct?
I did.
What positions have you held since graduating McDaniel here at McDaniel?
Yes, I came back as the assistant to the director of college activities. It was a newly formed position, and my counterpart in the registrar's office was the assistant to the registrar. Her name was Tony. I can't remember Tony's last name now, but we teased that we were the only two assistant twos, so to speak. But that was my first position here, and with that I was responsible for student staffing of the game room and the information desk at the time. It's currently called the welcome desk, and setting up stuff in the building itself and helping the director at the time with some of the capboard type stuff that was going on then. It was called something else then, but it also became capboard.
All right. Would you say in that position and then your later positions, did you have a high level, a low level, medium level interaction with the student body?
I would say pretty high level of interaction, constantly, not just daily, but all the time, in the sense of being not just the co-advisor for Capboard, going backwards here, but also someone that students tend to seek out, not just black students, and not just other students of color, but some of the white students also sought me out. A lot of the males at times would seek me out, and some of the females too. So definitely a mentor in a lot of ways. And I guess just a good shoulder to cry on a lot of times, so that felt good, and I still enjoy that.
You're so big and broad.
Yeah, it's like that. Yeah, I like that. It's like that.
Having such a high level interaction, as you said, being a mentor to some of these students, would you see that some of the issues you had in your first couple years here as undergrad repeated it time and again with other undergrads that came in facing culture shock coming from like Baltimore or DC?
Sure. I think everything's cyclical, but I would say definitely. For me, one of the adjustments was the attire, because I was used to, from high school, and I went to high school, like I said, in East Baltimore, we always dressed nicely for school. We didn't wear necessarily a suit, that kind of high end, but a nice dress shirt and slacks most times, or pants. Very rarely would we wear jeans unless they were ironed and pressed and that kind of stuff. So sweats and some of the other more casual wear that students tend to wear at college now, and even back then, we were foreign to. And I say we mean most of the black students. We all had the same problem, like we're not used to not dressing, for school. So coming here and doing that was an adjustment. And some of the students to this day still come in and say, it's a little bit of a transition for me, not so much the dressing as I had when I was going through it, but I think some of the placement, feeling like you're fitting in and not physically and visually being someone that stands out. So that's some of it. So some of that still repeats.
All right. Would you say overall, though, it's gotten, I don't know, quantify it by saying better, but would you say that the overall situation has improved with increased diversity over the years, that would you say it's gotten better between your undergrad and, say, the undergrads that came in this year?
Oh, I would definitely say it's gotten better. And I'm going to jump around a little bit here in the sense that, yes, I think that the typical student, college student in general across the board, I'm saying nationally when I say across the board, I think they're definitely more tolerant and more willing to at least see that people are different, and not so much different in the sense of ethnicity or race or religion, but also everything from sexual orientation to just how they view the world, this whole class thing, I think people can kind of, after a few minutes of conversation, figure out where people stand on different issues and those kind of things. So I think it's definitely gotten better in the sense of being more tolerant. I think in the sense that students today don't necessarily see color, and I'll focus on that, as an issue. Where before, when I was an undergrad, for a black male to date a white woman, the black women would just be in uproar, like, there we go again, another black man dating a woman, and the whole jungle fever kind of concept, where now it's not that big a deal. People are kind of like, yeah, it's an interracial couple, and that's it. Don't move beyond that, like, that's it. So that definitely has changed a whole lot.
That's pretty good. Now, moving into your professional career, you've been at McDaniel 25-ish years, 25-plus years, right?
Yes.
While it is predominantly a Caucasian student body, it is also predominantly Caucasian faculty and staff. Would you say that's presented any, not necessarily hurdles, but interesting interactions in 25 years?
It has. I've run into some things that, I've had everybody from a trustee make a comment to students seeing something different and appreciating it, to everything else. And I'll go with the trustee first. I remember one interaction I had with a trustee, and I was a student visitor when I was an undergrad to the board of trustees. So I got to interact with a lot of trustees for dinners and other meeting type things. And I had one trustee, which was kind of a backhanded compliment, tell me, I'm really glad you're here, but I wish there were more like you. And I kind of leaned back over to him and said, yeah, there are more like me back in Baltimore City. He was kind of alluding, since he knew I was from Baltimore, he didn't expect me to be, I guess because of either stereotypes or perceptions. He thought I'd be very different, more animated, a little more haphazard in how I responded to things, so not very cultured, in a sense. So it kind of surprised him. And then I've had interactions over the phone with folks, where a lot of folks, I guess because depending on how ghetto-ish I kind of make my vernacular, they're not sure if I'm black or white. So when they see me, sometimes they're kind of like, whoa, you're a black guy. Like, yeah, this week I am.
I knew
Next
that.
week I might not be, so we'll see, So it's been interesting. And then students, per se, I've had a number of students tell me, Mitchell, which is definitely a plus for me, a feather in my cap, as my mama would say, that they don't see me as a black man, they see me as a person first, and I love that, I say, I forget you're black, and they'll say something, and not to say something derogatory or offensive, not in that vein at all, but just they'll make a statement, and we'll talk about different things related to race or color or ethnicity, and they'll make a statement, and they'll look to me like, I didn't offend you. They're like, no, I feel the same way you do about that. So, that kind of thing definitely makes me feel better, with that whole line of communication and interacting.
Well, that's... consider that probably a pretty good thing here. Has, now moving beyond just the scope of the Hill.
Okay.
You gotta get a sandwich from Subway. Pick up that loaf of bread for your wife from Safeway. Carroll County isn't, as diverse as, say, Baltimore was.
Yeah.
What kind of interactions have you had in the greater Carroll County community
Sure.
beyond just the Hill?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's funny, and I'll pick a little bit of the townspeople. And I'll say the Union Street folks. When I first got here, they definitely assumed that because I'm black and I came from the city that I probably have more of an affluential background than I had. So I was like, no, I'm first generation college bound here, so no, I don't have any, a Beamer sitting home, and my parents didn't send me to a parochial school, that kind of stuff. No, I kind of had to sweat through it too. And then I guess the other part of that would probably be one interaction I had where I went to Boggers here in town and noticed that there was a Klan paper, and this is back now, granted, we're talking like 77, 78. Klan paper sitting there, and I'm kind of like, oh, that threw me off. I didn't expect it to be that in my face, and then to have an establishment, promote it the way they did with it. Granted, it wasn't sitting in a rack, it was on the floor, but other papers were there on the floor with this paper, from the Carroll County Times to some other local advertisements that were there, there. So that surprised me, for sure. And then with the whole concept and knowledge through the Black Student Union at Gamber, which was kind of at the time a Klan kind of area, was only 15 minutes away, kind of surprised me. And then for me personally, I guess my junior year undergrad, I was walking my girlfriend back from the residence hall. I lived in A&W, and I was walking her back from us studying, and she and I noticed that there were two students, and we didn't find out until after the fact, two students in Klan's attire walking into McDaniel Lounge, and it kind of caught us off guard, and we all commented, in a sense, like, what's going on? And I think other students, African-American students, had commented to the Vice President of Student Affairs at the time, and he took care of it and figured out who the two students were and definitely reprimanded them, and I forget what their sanction was at the time, but definitely it did not happen again. The insensitivity was definitely brought, to light for the whole campus, and I think something was done to stop that kind of behavior.
Sorry. Well, that sounds like probably a pretty good change for time. Are there any other stories or experiences that you feel would be necessary to be recorded for posterity?
Well, Pat, I could be here for an hour.
You've been working here 26 years. You're a student here. Just, anything else you want to get off your chest and locked away in a vault?
Locked away in a vault. Well, it's interesting because I know being in the more administrative level and moving up the ranks, it is interesting to watch people's reactions. And I think most students and most faculty and most staff on campus don't necessarily see my color, but see some of how I am. And then the color is kind of a punctuation part to the whole thing. So I do appreciate that, and really I like that, and feel very comfortable here, in a sense. And I think most folks that go through here do. I think most folks of color that have been here for a while, even if they've only been here 5 years, they do feel, that there are different niches that they can fit into and definitely get support, and don't see color as an issue. And I kind of applaud Daniel for that. I know it didn't necessarily start that way, because I know that the first two minority folks here were true Africans, students. And so we've come a long way in that sense. But I know that we do have other ways to go. Admissions, I know, for example, has definitely been influential in getting undergraduates here of color. And when there's an admissions counselor that is also a minority, it definitely adds to the number that are here. And there's definitely a correlation. So I hope we never lose that. And the fact that we've created this Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs shows that the institution does support it, and I wish that they would do even more, by expanding that office and then definitely adding to the staffing that's there. You can always, bring a person in, but if you don't continue to educate them and train them and send them to conferences, it's kind of a waste, and they get stale. So we got to continue doing that too. So a lot of those little things definitely need to keep going on.
In your call it 25, 26 years here, what do you see as some of the most beneficial changes that you've seen as time has progressed?
Sure. I think the sense of creating the office was one for multicultural services. I think continue to keep someone of color in admissions helps, and I wish that we would expand all around. I think the faculty, they've inched up. At the time when I was an undergrad, there were 4 minority folks here. Dr. Neal, Dr. Wu, and a gentleman in foreign language at the time, I believe. So we definitely expanded faculty-wise, but we need to do more. There's not as many as I wish at this point in time. But, we definitely have a good holding and a nice stand with what we have. In the sense of giving folks of color higher positions definitely helps. Not that everybody has to be here, because I see more in the blue-collar areas, physical plant, housekeeping, food service, and we can move up. It'd be nice to have a dean at some point, higher than an associate dean, so to speak, or a vice president, that's a person of color would be nice too. So those kind of things, we'll keep pushing for that.
All right. What advice would you give to an incoming, freshman that comes in the fall, from Baltimore, that, 26 years, 30 years down the road, he's sitting in your seat? Like, what advice would you give, to yourself, but today, in today's time, coming into McDaniel?
Sure. I think I do, or suggest they do what I did, is kind of venture out. It took me a while, again, with the culture shock. It would be real easy to kind of stay in your little cocoon and not see the world and explore the world and try new things. And so I think being open-minded and truly getting out there and doing things, interacting with people, treating people with a neutral label first, and then deciding after you interact with them which way you want to go with them. And then trying everything that's here. Before you wave the race card or play the race card, try things out. Give the benefit of the doubt. And that's one of the things I think everybody should do, especially of any kind of minority. Don't play the race card right out. You're going to butt heads with people. Yeah, you're going to have interactions with folks that would become like a major conflict for you. But don't always assume it's because of your race. Don't pick that as a reason why you don't get along with people and why you're not liking people and why you'll never like people. It's like, no, you're going to be different, and accept the fact you're going to be different, and then work through that.
Any other thoughts you wish to share with the annals of history?
I can't think of any, Pat.
Well, then, I thank you for the interview, and hopefully we'll get this, posted all over the world, make it a huge star.
Pat, don't do that. Don't do that. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mitchell.